So you're welcome along to Monday Night Rugby, a slightly different Monday Night Rugby for you this evening. Dan Tuohy. Dan Tuohy, 34 years of age, played 140 odd times with Ulster, 136 to be exact, between 2009 and 2016. Played 11 times with Ireland, including a try on his debut against New Zealand. And then in more recent years, he went off to Bristol. He was briefly at Stade Francais. And as you'll hear, now playing with Vannes in the French second division, has decided to call time on his career after a terrible hand injury. So Dan Tuohy announced his retirement just over a week ago on Twitter. He penned a letter which garnered a lot of attention, frankly, because of its honesty. Amongst other lines, he called rugby rotten to its core, which caught the eye. So last Thursday, we recorded a chat with him. Now, we weren't the only ones. He's done quite a few interviews, even in the meantime, so our apologies if you're slightly Dan Tuohy'd out, but it's still a very good chat. He is honest more than anything about the life of just a normal rugby player. This is not a 100 caps for Ireland player. This is not a Lions superstar. This is more of an insight into the life of the majority of professionals. So in that respect, it's very interesting, and he's very honest about lots of things. So we'll get right into it. This was on Thursday, and I started with his retirement statement, which you should, by the way, read in full on Twitter. It's very interesting. And I wondered, had nobody told him that sports people were not meant to be that honest?
Yeah, I could have easily just done the old picture of the boots hung up on the peg, if you like, in the changing room. But I actually did an interview that afternoon with a local French paper, and I was politely asked what I'm doing for the remainder of the season and next season. I said, well, I've missed the last 17 games, and I'm going to miss the next 10. So with my age profile and the nature of my injury and the high risk element of my injury of re-injuring if I continue to play, then I figured, you know what, kind of like me, for most of my career, I'm not always far away from a little bit of controversy, or I'm willing to say what I feel. And I just thought I'd put something together, and I think by and large it's got a pretty decent reception.
No, it's gone down very well. You're over in France at the moment.
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
And you hadn't been playing with Vannes?
Yeah, Vannes is based in South Brittany, and this is actually my second season in the Pro de Deux with Vannes, and we had a pretty successful first season, and unfortunately I've not been able to contribute as much as I would have liked this year.
The injury sounds fairly horrific. Tell people about that if you can.
Yeah, so during the third game of the season, the first one at home, the game was started against Oyonnax. They took the kick-off, and I was just being lifted by my prop from behind and my front lifter to receive the kick-off. Because it was going a little bit further back, possibly into our 22, the winger they had on our side didn't think I was going to catch it, or if I did drop it, he was there as a safety net, which is quite common. He actually ran in and clashed feet with the prop lifting me from behind, so he subsequently dropped me from the top of the jump, as it were. I caught the ball, fallen on my left arm, the top of my humerus and my shoulder, and a little bit dazed from the knock on the ground from my head. I looked down and saw my left palm. If you can imagine, my left palm was facing the wrong way, all the way to the left-hand side, so it was rotated. Naturally, I thought I must have dislocated my elbow, because that was the reason, the sort of area I sort of fallen on. So I grabbed my elbow. The referee stopped the game. And later on at the hospital, through X-ray, etc., that we realised the humerus had broken completely from the top part. So it was a clean break, and the whole arm from halfway down the bicep to the end of my hand, as it were, had rotated left. So after some X-ray and the doctors and nurses putting the arm a bit more comfortable in place to hold me for the weekend, I had the surgery on the Monday.
And was the sense very early on that this would be very difficult to come back from and career-threatening?
So I had been brought off the pitch underneath the stadium, like it is pretty commonplace. I had been given some pain relief morphine at the stadium. My wife would come down to see me with a fellow player, and I just looked at my wife and said, yeah, this is me done. I'm not doing this anymore. The look on her face, I thought, I'm not putting you through this anymore. And then a couple of days later, fast forward to having the surgery on the Monday, I'd spoken to the surgeon, and he said, look, you've damaged your nerve and your radial nerve. I can't stand here and tell you how that will take to repair. So he said it could be 3 weeks, 3 months, or even a year. And from there on in, I thought, no, it will be fine. It'll only probably be a couple of months and I'll be back playing. A couple of weeks after that, I thought, there's not a chance I'm going to be able to get back. I had very limited movement on my arm. The nerve damage means I've lost all sensation down a large part of my left arm, my bicep, and down my forearm.
So I guess then, Dan, when the possibility of paralysis, when that word comes into the conversation and you're 34 years of age, that's kind of conversation over. That's a quick conversation.
Yeah, it is really. I think it'd certainly be very selfish of me to run that risk and carry on playing because my wife and my family are the ones that have to pick up the pieces when I am paralysed and my hand does not work and it does not function. So at my age, it was a no-brainer, really. If I was 26, I might have given it a second thought, but for me, it was an easy decision.
You said there, I looked at my wife under the stadium and I thought to myself, I can't put her through that anymore, which suggests it's not the first time she has been upset at something going on in your career. Give us a sec, because we never talk on the show that much about the families, the wives. So when you saw her face, that sounds like it was a familiar sight.
So I actually met her, my current wife now, not too long before I represented Ireland in the 2014 Six Nations. So we've got this little running joke. Ever since I've met her, I've actually had the most bizarre string of injuries that I've had throughout my whole career. I've had 3 radius breaks, 2 on my right, 1 on my left, in my arm. And now I've had this humerus break, had quite a severe ankle injury that kept me out for 10 months and 2 hand operations as well. So she's had to pick up the pieces through for all of this. And even from me with my ankle injury, I couldn't even walk up the stairs. I had to crawl up the stairs alongside helping me out and making food for me or whatever it might be. You know, she's got to deal with me as a person. I'm not the easiest always to live with. Couple that with some serious injuries that are threatening my career, contracts. It's not easy. It's not an easy life. People make it out to be easy, but it's not. That's
a big stress in the relationship. At any point across that long list of injuries, and that sounds horrific, and I don't know what's going on with your arms and your hands, but geez, they seem to bear the brunt of it as well. At any point in the years, do you two look at each other and say, maybe this is the time to go?
Well, I had left Ulster and signed for Bristol, and I had sort of left Bristol a couple months before the end of my official contract to take up a medical joker position in the staff front say. I was 32 at the time that summer, just turned 32, and I said to her, I was out of contract, had no job, and I said, I just feel I can go 2 more years. I just feel I owe it to myself. I don't think I'd be fully satisfied if I finished at 32. I knew I could have gone 2 more, and there would have been a what if. I got a little bit lucky with the club coming over here and how things worked out. But now it's finished and I'm thinking about other things. I think it was the right decision to do that. It's just a shame, like I said earlier, that I couldn't quite represent the club and do myself justice in my final season.
Are you more, if we have kind of a spectrum here, are you more in the relieved end of the spectrum or the heartbroken, it's over end of the spectrum?
Relieved that I've got it out. It wasn't the biggest secret. If anyone was to ask me, I pretty much knew, like I said earlier on with my injury. I'm apprehensive. I'm excited, but I know what I'm going to miss. And I've been out now for close to 6 months. And so that's given me a little bit of a run-off time to get my head around it, to get used to not being around the players and being in that dressing room environment that all professionals talk about. So, yeah, I think I'm going to miss it. I think even when I'm 44, I'll still think I can play at a certain level. That's just my competitive nature. But I'm excited for what the future holds.
Yeah. How qualified are you for the real world, or do you have to start all that now?
I've got a 2-1 in the University of Life, but that's about it, to tell you the truth. It was an issue for me. I kind of always knew that I was a little bit behind on that one. I'm not great in terms of in the classroom. I'm more of a hands-on type of guy. I have done a few bits and bobs over the last 6 months. I've been offered a position here with a club in France for the remainder of the season, being involved in the players as a sort of bridge to the players and the coaching staff, and assisting the coaching staff as well. So maybe that's something I'd like to get into. Maybe I'll stay here a little bit longer. I'm just kind of going to enjoy the next few months of sort of towards the end of the season. Hope we can have a nice finish after the season here, and I think I'll take some time and assess my options come the summer.
In your written statement, rather, one of the obvious points was that you thoroughly enjoyed so much of your career and you're very grateful for your career. But also it read as if you were at a point now where you weren't so in love with the modern game in 2020. Like the line that jumped out at a lot of people was, the values that made me fall for rugby have nearly disappeared.
Yeah.
Very, very, very interesting. So what are the values, and talk to us about their disappearance?
So when I first got into rugby, I was actually 17, 18 years old. It was obviously amateur. You could go for a beer. There was a huge amount of camaraderie, and I still think that carried on when I turned professional at Gloucester. I think it was a very old school changing room. I really fell in love with that sense of family, brotherhood, banter, if you like, in the change room. And it wasn't so much of from what I saw it was, even though I was starting out, so much of a cutthroat business. You fast forward on now to close to 15 years, I think most of those comments were born out of the frustration of what's happened in England, especially with the RFU Championship. I myself played for 3 different clubs in that championship, and it was a huge part of my career and progression. And I think rugby's based upon, you like to think it's based upon integrity, honesty, being able to look at somebody in the eye and tell them whether they've done well, whether they've done wrong, if their services are not required. And that shows an amount of human compassion and a human element to that. Now, I've heard many different stories about many different professionals, from coaches to players to support staff, where they're losing their jobs right at the end of the season. They're only being told by letter, by told in a quick shotgun type meeting. They're not allowed to prepare for it. They're not allowed to think about other jobs. And it's turning into football. I think that's what we wanted. I think there's that much money in the game that you can just fire and hire as quick as you like. And the social element, which I touched on earlier, I think the teams that are doing it best, and I can only relate to some of the teams that I've been at and some of the teams I know and for the years I've been at, are some of the most successful. I think sometimes you demonize that pressure of players just letting them be themselves. And when you give them that responsibility and treat them like adults, I think it repays the coach and staff in tenfold, in my opinion.
So players treated increasingly like commodities is the sentiment I'm getting.
Well, I think throughout my career, I've been treated like a child. I've also been treated like an adult, and I can only speak for myself. And when I get treated like an adult, I had much more respect for the person that treated me like an adult. And I certainly think they got a better buy-in from me as a player and as an athlete. Being spoken to like a child and being treated like a child and spoken to behind your back and finding out things through third parties is no way you should treat anybody, and especially a professional athlete. Who
treated you best?
I would say as a coach, and I'll speak about my time at Ulster, I had a good fondness for Brian McLaughlin. He was very, very good for me. I think on a human level was it'd be tough to choose between Mark Anscombe and Brian McLaughlin. Mark was great because Mark felt like he was like an uncle. You could talk about your personal life problems. You could talk about your wife, your home life, your kids, what you were doing in the summer, what you did in the summer, what you did at the weekend. There was no grey area with Mark because he could sit down, look you in the eye, tell you weren't good enough at the weekend for X, Y, and Z. Also praise when it's needed. Plus he could sit down and have a beer with you. He was an approachable guy, and he got an awful lot of that squad, and we could have probably should have done a lot more than we did.
And what does being treated like a child look like or sound like?
Well, I'll give you an example of the time I didn't get treated like a child. I was at Bristol, and you'll know Pat Lamb well, and I was coached a little bit by Pat Lamb. But when I was at Bristol, he told me, he said, "Listen, Dan, can I have a meeting with your office? Can you sit down and have a word with me?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, no problem." He said, "We're not going to keep you next season. We're not going to trigger your final year of your contract." He goes, "I'll tell you what I'll do. We'll pay you for the remainder of the months that you're contracted. We'll let you go on loan to Stade Francais so you can play some rugby. Hopefully you can pick up another deal on the back of that. And I'll tell you what, if anyone ever needs a reference, tell them to give me a shout, and I'll be more than happy to help you out in any facet for the remainder of your career. And I thought to myself, he's just released me on amicable terms. I ended up walking out shaking his hand. And I thought to myself, that's how you get treated like an adult. On the flip side, being treated like a child is commonplace for team socials, sort of labelled as something they couldn't handle, and that was a problem some of the years I had at Ulster. And I think ultimately that was probably where we clashed heads a little bit sometimes with the branch, and I think that was probably leading to the reason why I finished up a little bit earlier than I was contracted to.
Right. And I'm not asking this, by the way, with any kind of agenda. Would you have been perceived as tricky to manage? Would you have clashed routinely with coaches?
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. I think I could have been tricky. I was a loud voice. I certainly wouldn't shy away from confrontation. So, yeah, probably would have said that, yeah.
How did Joe Schmidt deal with Dan the loud voice Tuohy?
Mine and Joe's relationship was pretty amicable face to face. As we all know, Joe's has his certain elements and the way he wants to do things. It didn't work out that well, and I think when I reflect on my career, I made 11 caps along with some other games that were not capped. I really should have made 20 to 30 caps, to be honest. I don't think I fully realised my own potential, and that is completely 100% on myself. There were elements of that throughout my time with Ireland, and consistency being one of that problem. But Joe knew the buttons to push on me to get me going, but he also he may not have known that when he pushed certain buttons or didn't push them, he certainly knew how to break me. And it was a tough time for me at times with Joe. So I played some good rugby in and around the Irish squad and a few times for Joe, but I also played some of my worst rugby in Ireland jersey.
Right. Break me is quite a strong word. How do you mean?
Well, I think when I say break, I would sometimes come away from Ireland camp having thought I was going to be close to a squad or showing really good form for my province, come down to Ireland camp and just have all those doubts creep in again, him reinforcing me that, I need to be more accurate here, this and the other. And look, I needed to fit into what Joe Schmidt does. He is an incredibly successful coach, whether it be provincially, in France, on the international stage. He was very successful. So I'm not saying I'm right and he's wrong. Absolutely not. I just think he didn't really understand the way to best get my form, if that comes across well. No,
it does. I mean, certain players need different, to use your phrase, buttons pushed, and maybe arm around the shoulder might be the wrong way of putting it, but to nurse you along a bit more as opposed to highlight the weaknesses and the issues.
Yeah, well, I was part of the 2015 World Cup widest training squad, and by my own admission, I can sit here and honestly say I probably came in a little bit overweight. I had a relaxing holiday with my family in the summer, so I was playing a little bit catch up. I had a little bit of an Achilles problem, so I couldn't do all of the training, and I missed out on the selection for the squad. Actually, I actually had a really good game off the bench against Wales, played really poorly against Scotland when I started at the Aviva. So I was told I was on reserve standby. So naturally, I'm watching the World Cup, hoping I can do well, enthusiastically watching my friends, Darren and Chris Henry, that I was close with. And I saw Paul O'Connell get injured, for example, in that French game, which was ultimately the injury that finished him. And for the last number of weeks, I'd been telling everybody that I was on standby, and I was thinking, right, here comes the phone call. And then nothing come. And then one of the guys in camp texted me, said, Mike McCarthy's just arrived. And I thought, Jesus Christ, and that really hit home hard, because I never got a phone call off anybody. And I was embarrassed. In front of my missus, her family, my family, all my friends, my peers. I thought, I am just broken to the core, because that was that was everything for me. And then post that World Cup, and that was the last time I even represented Ireland. So, you know, I've partly to blame for that, but it was a tough time for me, I must admit.
Yeah, it's brutal, and you feel a bit foolish for telling everybody you're so close to going as well, is the point. Yeah, that is the cutthroat element of the business, isn't it? I would think everybody at that World Cup was just even too busy to think about calling you to massage the pain of the exclusion.
100%. 100%. It was like, right, Paulie's gone. Next job, we need to get somebody in, get them up to speed as quickly as possible. And for whatever reason, I've never asked Joe, but it wasn't me.
What would he say, Dan? Do you think? Because Joe's not here. If we bumped into him down the line and we said, by the way, Dan Tuohy, where did he kind of not quite come up to scratch, or what was the issue?
Well, Joe must have been an admirer of me, because, you know, I featured in the 2014 Six Nations. I could have gone on to feature more. I had broken my arm in the second game.
Yeah.
I was called in the squad ahead of certain players in that 2015. So he definitely was an admirer of me. But I think what he may have had a problem with is that my consistency could have been an issue for him. And also, at times, fairly and unfairly throughout my career, I was possibly labelled a little bit of a penalty machine, or I could have given away that penalty that was maybe a little bit too aggressive that I probably didn't need to give away. But I always tried to play on that edge, and I felt like I was that natural number 5 lock, as it is here in France. So maybe he didn't really feel that he could trust me if the high pressure environment was on. Maybe I might be liable for a penalty, and maybe he was right.
You said a very interesting thing as well, which is probably a tricky thing to live with as well, where you don't feel you hit your potential. And nobody wants to feel that. Why was that, or was it down to, did you not work hard enough, or was it a belief thing, a confidence thing, or a bit of luck here and there? What do you think?
Well, I first came into the squad, and I'll talk about Ireland potential. I first got called into a wider squad with Declan Kidney. I think it was in 2009, 2010 when I first arrived in Ireland for Ulster. And I was training amongst the players. I was never going to play, but I was training amongst the players. And Paulie and Donica O'Callaghan, the two guys were nailed on starters. And I thought to myself, geez, I'll be surprised if I ever reach this level of my career. They were very, very impressive around that time. Spending more time with them, playing against them in provincial. And there was a sort of gap in between Paulie and Donica headed into their 30s. And then behind that was Donica Ryan. And if I remember correctly, it was Mick O'Driscoll, kind of a Leo Cullen type era, if you like. And I just felt that if I could have forced my way into that a little bit harder and a bit more decisively, given maybe a few more opportunities, but also forced my way into it with making Declan pick me, I could have just got a few, like I mentioned earlier, up to that level of 20 or 30 caps. And then after that, it was Dev came onto the scene. Then it was around that sort of time, and then Ian Henderson, and as we are to the current day. So, and Mike McCarthy, of course, along the same time as Devon. So I felt there was an opportunity for me to get in. Yeah. I just don't think I quite capitalised it, and I don't think I was consistent enough at that high level. Yeah, well, look, that's kind of very honest as well. Generally in these conversations, we do the retirement interview with somebody who has played, 60, 70, 80 times for Ireland, and they, we're having that kind of a conversation. It's very interesting to talk to somebody who was just so close, like could touch it, could smell it, was, fine margins away from, as you say, 20, 30 caps. Away from Ulster in Ireland camp, because obviously 136 times for Ulster, you played for Ulster. What's it like being in that cohort outside the starting team in Ireland camp, week after week, holding the tackle bags? Is that enjoyable, or actually is it almost in some ways painful being so close to it but not quite part of it? No, it's not enjoyable at all, to tell you the truth. Right. The issue is you go through this 8-week block in the Six Nations, and you're in camp, you get rejected, you're like, right, next week I'll dust myself down, go back again, get rejected again. Okay, get released to the province, have poor preparation week, try and pull a performance out of your backside, have another week off because the gap in the Six Nations, and then that cycle just repeats. And then before you know it, you've gone through 2 months and you've become negative, you've become despondent, You know you're not going to play because the team's already picked. You know this. You start negatively hoping for an injury so you can slide your way in there. You're just desperate for anything. You're trying stuff at training. There's a group of guys that are going through the exact same. They're doing it now. And I don't think there's really any way to fix it, to tell you the truth. You need those players in camp. And, there always was an emphasis towards the end. The team is only as strong as the guys that are missing out. If their standards are good, you can drive on. So you try your best to do that. But you put a smile on your face and try not to be so negative. But there is a group of guys that aren't playing, and you do tend to hang out with those guys a bit more often. And the chat is a lot more negative. And then you get your release to your province and you try and play with a little bit of hate to force yourself into it. But as we know, as international rugby, seldom do they make changes. They seldom say to themselves, right, that's a poor performance. Yank 8 players out and put another 8 players in. They tend to stick with the tried and trusted.
Is there any guilt as you sit there thinking to yourself, God, an injury would be good here, or a good tonking at the hands of England would be good here?
Yeah, it's not a great way to think. It's not, but you're so desperate to get onto that pitch. You're like a caged animal. You're literally desperate to the point of despair. So you don't want them to lose, and you never would wish an injury on anybody, serious or. But you're like, I wonder if he's got a little rib injury or something. Maybe I could slide in, I could press in. And you're just desperate, absolutely desperate to get on the bench or aren't involved in that matchday squad.
Yeah.
Just say you've been there, just to say you've fulfilled the role. You can hold your head up high when you go and speak to your family and friends. Like, it's unbelievable the feeling you get when you get it, and then also when it's taken away from you.
Yeah, I'm sure. It's a few times now you've mentioned your family and friends, so you're always, acutely aware of them watching you either play or not play as well. How are you around the house in general life? Because, you're so defined by your rugby, and yet that's a long stretch of time you're talking about. That's an entire spring, and then you try and get your form back. Ulster could be out of Europe, and you're thinking, there goes another season. So were you good at parking all that stuff?
You hit the nail on the head. It does happen that quickly. I think earlier on when my son Jackson was young, I don't think I was that great at parking, to tell you the truth. I never came home and thought, right, I can just jump straight into being a dad. I can forget about what had happened. That was a little bit of a struggle of mine around 2014, 15. And it was just learning to cope with that. It was all a little bit new to me. Fatherhood and the rejection and just the whole pressure cooker. And now looking back 5 years on, I probably should have spoken to somebody, probably should have used my experience, used the services available to me. But you're so just thinking of the next job. You're so like, right, I must show them, I must force it down their neck. If they can't see it, I must ram it down their neck so they can't not see it. So fast forward on now, what I have to change in my mindset is that I'm no longer a rugby player. I'm a husband, I'm a dad, and I was all, those things that matter more than just the rugby player. I was Dan Tuohy, the rugby player who happened to be a husband and a dad. Now I need to reverse that and change my priorities and the way I think about things. I
know. So many of the personality traits that served you well as a player are not good for life,
No, they're not. No, they're not. I was incredibly selfish.
Right.
And you can't be like that.
Yeah. Because you said, like, there's people should go onto your Twitter page and read the statement, and they may have seen it already, but, there's lots of little interesting nuggets in there. I'd grown sick and tired of the pre-season goal setting of honesty and respect being brandished around only to be broken almost straight away by the same people preaching it. I mean, it doesn't need explanation. Yeah. I can imagine. The other line which jumped out at everyone was, you said of rugby, it is starting to look like it's rotten from the core. And do you know, my first thought on that was, maybe that's my paranoia, it might be just me, I thought that was more along the lines of performance-enhancing drugs.
No, I was actually asked this question the other day, and look, I think when you're talking about international competition, any level, I think there could be an element of that. I've certainly not experienced it through my career. Right. I can categorically say that when I was at Ulster, well, I don't know about other provinces, but I'm pretty much sure Ulster had their own supplement program, optimum nutrition sponsorship. So that was incredibly rigorous, and you had everything there for you anyway. So I think it will be a thing going forward. I think there's so much pressure and there's so much money to be made to be a professional rugby player. I think the kids coming through need to be educated on the effects and possibly the pitfalls. And I think guys that maybe are 26, 27, 28, maybe even older, 30, and thinking, I need to do something to hold on to this contract because I've only got a couple of years left to go. I need to do something. I need to push the envelope on being overlooked. Then potentially they could start thinking about those sort of things. But for me, the writing to the core comment was really born out of the frustration with the RFU, the recent budget cuts and the lavish expenses that the England players do receive, which has been negotiated by them with, no doubt, the RPA and with the RFU, and little interest is really made of the fact that 50% of the England team, or they're close to about, was played actually in the RFU Championship. They owe a lot to that in the RFU Championship. Now, you know, you hear many different stories, whether it be the Twickenham construction being overrun and they need to save the budget, but I'm sure the 25 grand a game the players get in the prawn sandwich brigade that toes alongside the RFU and England Rugby could afford a little bit on the side there to help these guys out, because that is one element of rugby that the compassion is completely gone.
It's true. It's desperate.
Everything at the top, and we'll just slice the knees at the bottom. We'll just cut it from the bottom, but everything at the top we'll keep.
It certainly ring fences the Premiership. It'll mean a lot of clubs going part-time. So, I mean, that's a fair point. How, away from your arm and the nerve damage, how have you emerged at 34 years of age physically? I mean, we've had numerous players talk about painkillers being very much, you know, the crutch that gets you through a professional career. Where are you now in that regard?
No, I've actually, fortunately enough, not had to rely upon them. There was a period of my career, probably I was at Ulster, so I must have been 28, 29, that I was playing an awful lot. That I think the more serious ones would have been just an anti-inflam. You know, I had a few stomach issues, I remember, and just trying to get anti-inflams in me to play. And like I said, it all boils down to that pressure pot of trying to impress, really, whether it be provincial or national coaches. You just do anything you can to get out on the pitch. I've been fortunate enough not to suffer too many concussions in my career, but there's certainly times when I put pressure on myself to play injured. And sometimes I managed to performance-wise, managed to get by. Sometimes I did not.
What's the prognosis for your hand, Dan? What does the future hold?
So, just before Christmas, if you imagine the nerve travelling down my arm, my wrist was almost non-functional. It couldn't move at all. It just sat in sort of a limp position, if you like. And post-Christmas, the nerve damage has improved, so my wrist now works. And I'm hoping the nerve will continue to go until my fingers. So I've had a multitude of tests in here in France. The medical facilities over here is second to none. And I've been told that I've a little while to go with this nerve damage, and just be patient. Just be patient. Your fingers will come back. They might not come back to 100%, but to be patient, basically, and you should be absolutely fine leading a normal life. Okay.
It's it's been fascinating to listen to you and to get, you know, to not have the, like I said, the 100-test career in here, and to get a sense for the realities of being a really good pro who's had a fine career as well. I did get the sense from your statement that for all the, not for all the complaints, for the few complaints, that still you emerged as someone who said, do you know what though, it was kind of amazing, and I've gone from, you know, from Bristol to playing for Ireland, playing for Ulster, scoring a try against New Zealand, a lot of friends, seen the world, pretty cool lifestyle despite the injuries, and you seemed on the whole to depart the scene not without a few regrets, but certainly not bitter.
I think that's the perfect way of putting it. Look, I was 18, like I said, when I started playing rugby. And do you know what I was doing most of the weekends? I was going out drinking and doing stupid stuff, having fights in town and just messing around, basically going absolutely nowhere in my life. I was a felt roofer, I was a labourer. And I got an opportunity through my ability to play rugby to go to Hartpury on a scholarship. And I couldn't let that pass up. And that decision there changed my life. I don't know where I would have gone post if I didn't do that with rugby. I made that decision to go to Hartpury. I went from Gloucester, and 15 years later, I'm sat here talking to you, and I've had an amazing career. I do have some regrets, of course, but I've made some really, really good friends, some amazing memories nobody will be able to take away from me. And I can exit the game with, like I said, some regrets, but honestly, I'm generally really proud of my achievements. And I need to start telling myself that, because that's not always easy to say that to people, because it will come across as a little bit overzealous or confident or with a little bit of attitude. But I am generally proud of what I've done, and hopefully I can have a successful transition from, what am I now, 34? I've got to work for the next 30 years, do a real job, and enjoy my life, you know?
Yeah, you're suddenly a young man again in the real world, so that's kind of the thing. Yeah. I mentioned the try against New Zealand, and I think there was a Heineken Cup final, obviously, in 2012 as well. To finish up, what was the highlight? What was the favourite day or the go-to day for you?
Yeah, you're going to have to look. It would be hard to look past my first cap in New Zealand, even though we were about 38-0 down when I came on and scored that try. People still talk about it to me now. I'm here in France, and people said, "Oh, I saw your try on YouTube." That was something special to me. I think one was really special was my first game on Irish soil, and that was the Scotland game in the Six Nations in 2014. I was actually scheduled to be on the bench. Paulie was ill overnight, and I got a start, and I found out that morning.
Did you slip something into his drink overnight, or how did that happen?
He took it overnight, and I was having my porridge in the morning, and Joe came up to me and said, "You're going to start." I was just wolfed my breakfast down to me, ran to my room, texted my old man, and I was 28, and it never changed. Like, you just get super giddy, and he was desperate that he couldn't make it over because he hadn't scheduled to come over. So it was just, the island things really do stand out. They really, really do. And then the silly stuff. Travelling with Ulster, winning away from home, winning in Welford Road, just those little moments that you can look each other in the eye, have a beer in the changing room, and have a little sing-song. And those things, I know they're gone. I'm never going to be able to do that as a player again. But like I said, those memories will live with me for the rest of my life. I'm
sure they do. I know there's Tipperary heritage. Is it a grandparent? Is that on your dad's side?
Yes, it is. It's my dad's dad. He's passed away now, passed away a little while ago, and he is from Cashel, and he moved to Somerset in the 1950s to work on the nuclear power plant.
So it's Sellafield?
The nuclear power plant, Hinkley Point.
Hinkley Point, okay, right. So
Hinkley Point near Bridgewater, yeah. And as I said, the rest is history. And we've still plenty of family in Ireland. Hopefully my cousin Sinead, she'll be listening to this. She's an absolutely mad Munster fan, and she even tried to buy a Munster. She actually did buy a Munster strip for my son Jackson, but I politely declined.
Well, listen, the very best of luck. Thanks for coming on, reflecting on things, and giving us a really good, interesting summary of the career, and the very best of luck for the next 40, 50, 60, 70 years and beyond.
Yeah. Thanks very much for having me, and hopefully I'll pass across in the near future.
Good man. Thanks, Dan.